And for more analysis, Benjamin Horton is the Dean of the School of Energy and Environment from the City University of Hong Kong, and he's joining us live from Hong Kong. Professor Benjamin, China has for the first time, as we reported, set an absolute national emissions cut, 7 to 10% by 2035. Now, why is moving from intensity targets to an absolute cap such a big deal?
Well, China is currently the largest producer of carbon dioxide on our planet. So for a nation to change its outlook from ever-increasing use of coal and other forms of petroleum, ever-increasing amounts of carbon dioxide, to then agreeing to limit it, to now agreeing to decrease it, shows that the Chinese government are listening to science, are developing regulation and policy to try and protect the citizens of China, protect its nation, and because it's such a large polluter, protect the world.
But does China's pledge also insinuate that its emissions have peaked even more? And if so, when exactly?
Well, I think the devil is always in the detail here. We need to make sure that there is consistently good communication between the scientific public, that there is transparency in the data, and therefore we can develop the policies. Remember, this is all part of the COP agreement associated with keeping temperatures below this 1.5 degrees C threshold. This so-called Paris Agreement was put in place because scientists knew the dangers posed to civilization if you started to cross planetary boundaries. And these planetary boundaries are associated with a global mean temperature that is 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial values.
Right. And as you mentioned, I feel critics have long criticized plans from many nations as to their NDC and targets for cutting emission. And they've been saying that the plans still fall short, even though it does cover greenhouse gases and sets targets for clean power, EVs, and even forests. Do you share this critique? Where is it strongest, and what's the gap here?
Well, there's one thing to say a pledge, isn't there? There's another thing to see action on this, where the data is transparent and we can see the change in the amount of carbon dioxide being emitted to the atmosphere. And since the first COP meeting, all the way back in the 1980s, every single year, we've seen an increase in the amount of carbon dioxide. You know, the carbon dioxide concentrations in our atmosphere in 2025 are in excess of a unit called 425 parts per million by volume. The safety net for planet Earth is at around 280 parts per million by volume. We're far in excess of that. Every single year we increase our carbon dioxide, and therefore every single year we increase our temperatures, and therefore every single year we get more extremes. And living in Hong Kong, we know about this. This year we've had a record number of typhoons, and we're only trying to reopen our country today out of the afterfact of the super typhoon. So there's one thing on pledges. The next thing is seeing transparency. We need to see action, and then ultimately we need to see results. We need to see our carbon dioxide values starting to stabilize, and then as we move into the future, starting to decrease.
You mentioned a good point there. It shouldn't just simply be about pledges. We need to see concrete results, as we've been reporting all day on Regasa as well. We are seeing many weather conditions and calamities happen across the world, especially in the Asia region. Now, let's focus on Asia with China as we're talking about that. Is China trying to cast itself now as the responsible climate power? And is this coming at a right time? And if so, do you think that is in consideration of its rivalry against the U.S. as well?
I mean, I think there would be some confrontation to the changing rhetoric that has happened between the Biden and the Trump administration on climate. But I do think that China's pledges are genuine. I have worked in Hong Kong now for several months, and I see the interest in sustainability, the interest in biodiversity. I see the understanding of the threats posed by climate. So this is not about geopolitics. It's about understanding of the scientific information, understanding of the threats posed to the population of China and Hong Kong, and indeed the threats posed for future economic prosperity. Scientists know that if we don't control our carbon dioxide emissions, the extreme events are going to start to impact the lives and livelihoods of people in Hong Kong, of our critical infrastructure in mainland China, and therefore the investment, the insurance, the reinsurance, the innovation, the drive for green technology will stall and fail. You cannot quite simply have a healthy economy without a healthy planet. So science and business are starting to work hand in hand in mainland China and Hong Kong, and contrast that to the United States. In the United States, the national academies have led global science on climate change. But we have an administration in the United States who call it the greatest ever con job. But that doesn't stand up to the scientific data. The scientific data on climate change is stronger now than it ever has been. In 2024 was the warmest year since records began. 2024 had the warmest month since records began. And 2024 had the warmest day since record began. And we can see the impacts of that. We can see the impacts in our extremes. More and more people on planet Earth are being influenced by climate change through droughts and wildfires, through typhoons and heavy rains and landslides. We can see the information in our melting ice sheets and rising sea levels. So on one side of the geopolitical boundary, we have science and policy starting to align, and on the other side, we see the divergence.
That being said, then, if the science is clearly stating out the facts that we need stronger pledges, even more concrete actions rather than just these vocal pledges, what needs to be done? Could China actually nudge other big emitters like Brazil or Australia, India to also raise their game?
Well, there are a few things here. China is such a big emitter that it's the only country on planet Earth that if it changes its emissions significantly, it changes the emissions of the whole of planet Earth. So if it changes its emissions, it changes the climate for each one of the 8 billion people on planet Earth. But then it has other powers. What I would like to see, what I wish I could see at the biggest trade meetings or when leaders meet. So when Starmer met Donald Trump and we had all the information about that and all the interest, do you think that climate change came up in those talks? We know full well that that wasn't mentioned. What we would like to see regarding climate change is that it's at the top table whenever the G8 or the G20 meet, whenever there are trade negotiations, that climate change and carbon and renewable energy, EVs, are considered, because carbon needs to be considered as a significant input into the effectiveness of the health of the planet and therefore the health of the economy.
Health of the planet, health of the economy. Thank you so much. That was Benjamin Horton, Dean of the School of Energy and Environment from the City University of Hong Kong, on confronting the climate crisis.